السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. مبروك عليكم الشهر. Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests. Tonight, we welcome a decorated soldier, a passionate American patriot, and a great friend of the UAE, and a great friend to me personally. General Mattis's record and reputation are well known, so my introduction will be brief. Sir, as I'm sure you know, from your time in the Middle East, Iftar is an occasion to come together with family and close friends, to break the fast and enjoy each other's company. Your presence here tonight underscores our deep friendship and our respect. The UAE is grateful for your service and for your commitment to making this region more secure and more peaceful. I'm looking forward to an engaging discussion this evening, but first I'd like to briefly introduce General Mattis and share a few reflections. Jim Mattis enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps in 1969 and became an officer a couple years later. During his military service, General Mattis rose continuously through the ranks of the Corps, commanding troops at all levels in multiple military operations. The complete list of achievements and honors throughout General Mattis's distinguished military career is too long to list to share, but here are a few brief highlights. As a battlefield commander, he led an assault battalion during Operation Desert Storm. He also fought the Taliban in Afghanistan and helped lead the initial attack and subsequent stability operations in Iraq. In 2010, General Mattis was appointed head of Central Command, where he oversaw the ongoing wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he coordinated closely with America's regional allies and worked to confront and defeat a broad range of extremist organizations. He retired from the Marine Corps as a four-star general in 2013, and after a brief break, General Mattis was confirmed as Secretary of Defense in 2017, a position which he held for 2 years. Throughout his career, General Mattis was a partner in efforts to create a more stable region by confronting aggression and extremism. He provided principled leadership and demonstrated a clear-headed commitment to advancing our shared security interests in the Middle East. And at a more tactical level, General Mattis helped enhance Emirati Armed Forces capabilities. Conducting joint trainings and combined operations with the U.S. military in Afghanistan and later in the campaign against ISIS has been crucial to developing our forces' operational readiness and interoperability. We can thank General Mattis for his consistent effort and support in this area. Even as the UAE shoulders more of the burden, we continue to believe that the region is better off when the U.S. is engaged. This ongoing partnership between the UAE and the U.S. is crucial to maintaining stability in the region and towards keeping people safe in both of our countries. Much of our shared progress is due to the man sitting right here. General Mattis, it is with great admiration that I want to say thank you on behalf of the Emirati people. Your efforts have made our region and the world a safer place. Thank you, General Mattis.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Taiba and Ramadan Kareem. Thank you, all of you, Your Highness, all of you for inviting me here this evening. I don't take this for granted. I know it's an honor to be invited to speak with you, and I look forward to this. I turned down 99% of the requests for me to go places and talk, but I would just tell you it's a pleasure to be back here in the United Arab Emirates, back among friends, several of whom I've seen now in the audience. It was 1979, ladies and gentlemen, when as a young officer, as my friend Yusuf explained, I was in the Marines and out here for my first time. And I sailed by United Arab Emirates, and I remember using the binoculars on the bridge of the ship, and I did not see many tall buildings in 1979. So it's with a great deal of pride, a great deal of, I would just call it joy to watch this country come of age in this age of terrorism, this age of people acting badly, and to see wise leadership and what it can do in terms of bringing a people together and looking out for the prosperity and the safety of its people. I would say, too, it's been my special honor, ladies and gentlemen, to work with your military. I'll go into some details about why I found it to be such a pleasure to work with the leadership and your valiant military, but part of it is simply because there seems to be a shared affinity between your troops and your people. And that's not the case in the more than 70 countries I have visited, and of course of my career. You have something here to be envied, I assure you. And in returning here, I'm reminded too of a debt I owe you, a personal debt, a debt of gratitude, because I could always come to United Arab Emirates as providence or fate brought me up in the ranks of the Marine Corps and the U.S. military. And through all the difficulties, and you think back of 1979 and what happened that fateful year in this region, and how many problems we deal with today that stem from those days. And I would just tell you that I could come here in the good times, but especially in the bad times, and get sound strategic advice from your leadership. And for a number of reasons, having to do with competence, having to do with courtesy at times, we don't always hear what we need to hear. We get told things that people think we want to hear rather than the truth, which we need to hear. And when I came here, I would hear the truth. I would also tell you the military support I remain grateful for. Where in some militaries, they're good with their bands and they know how to march. This is a military that also knows how to defend its country and its interests. And every time trouble loomed, we found ourselves glancing over at each other once again together, dealing with the problems. So the friendship that was the hallmark allowed a degree of honesty, of strategic honesty, that really brings me back here today when I was invited to return to the United Arab Emirates. And that friendship has held strong even as the waters out here were roiled by political disagreements or certain countries behaving badly. Somehow we always made it through, and I'm very, very confident in the message I bring today that we will still be friends if we're holding this Majlis 10 years from now. We will still be together. And the reasons are deep, and I want to discuss those with you today. And so thanks to the Crown Prince's invitation, we meet again in this spirit of honesty and friendship. I was asked to explain what is the value the United States places on the strategic relationship between the United Arab Emirates and the United States. And I believe that it is a relationship that is critical to both of our countries. And I'll put my cards on the table right up front here because I'm just too fond of the people I've met here to be anything other than honest with you. Among friends, I've never found a need to dance around issues. We can be upfront, we can talk about the issues in an honest way, agree, disagree, because I could always walk out of those discussions here stronger for the intellectual rigor that this country places in the strategic discussions. I want you to know up front that America places a very high priority on this country. We look at every country separately, of course, but I think that in this case, the separate nature of your reputation is something that should be jealously guarded. United Arab Emirates, every country is different in the world, but United Arab Emirates, when you combine its culture with its history, with its advent on the modern scene as United Arab Emirates, not just Arab Emirates, but united, you carry a weight today in this world, and certainly with my country, that is unique. That does not put anyone else down, that does not denigrate anyone else, does not dismiss anyone else, but you are your own country, and you deserve recognition of what it is that you stand for, and just as importantly, what you stand against. I will try to explain why I am very confident that I can come here and look you in the eye and talk about the strength and the value America places on this relationship. And I can do so because watching America right now, especially young people, they could have some questions. What's going on in America? I mean, it seems like it's chaotic there. You know, Washington, D.C., you know, you can't get the straight message out of them. And after our very nasty argument with King George III, we didn't like being colonized any more than you liked it. And after that argument, we set up our government to be always arguing with each other inside the government. We set it up on purpose like that because we did not want to get rid of one colonial power and create a government that operated as if it was a king. So we're going to confuse you at times. That is a given because democracies go through these periods when there's a lot of argument, there's a lot of discussion, there's disagreement. We believe that it's in the long run our way of governing ourselves. It's not right for everybody, but it's our way, and it allows us to come to a better solution. But at the same time, it can certainly cause concern among our friends who look at this and say, wow, is America coming apart at the seams? I can assure you that it is not. So it's appropriate that I now share openly why. Okay, I've said that it's a very valued, very strong relationship. Why do I say that? And I believe it is critical to the children of both of our nations that we stay strong. And really, when you talk about strategy and put it in human terms, what you're talking about is the children who are going to inherit the world that we're strategically dealing with. You have to start with a fundamental question, and do we look at the world in somewhat the same way? Because if you do not, then obviously you're going to have trouble putting a strategic relationship together. And so the way I look at what a nation stands for is I simply read what its thought leaders say. I do it about the Americans as if it's a foreign country, so I better understand where my own country stands. But I would just say that a U.S. view of the world today is probably best summed up by the former U.S. Secretary of State, who at Stanford University, where I'll be working again in 2 weeks, former Secretary of State George Shultz, describes the world as a wash in change. And you think about that, he's saying that here's this world that everything is changing in it at once, technology and great power and terrorism and this sort of thing. And so I looked to find, what does the UAE think about this world? And Dr. Gargash has described it, and he is a very widely respected, as you know, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, and he says, we live in a world which is very fluid. Sounds a lot like a wash in change, very fluid. One in which the rules of the game have changed, but the rules are not yet known. So if we do not yet know the rules of that game, there is both peril, but there is also opportunity. There's challenge and opportunity, because if those rules are changing, young nations like United Arab Emirates, wisely led, should rightly be helping to write the rules. That's a reality. That's what it means when you respect one another in this world for your sovereignty, and you're not someone who's trying to dictate to others. Our agreement on that grand strategic situation in the world leads to a strategic outlook, which is going to be unique to each of our countries. But for our two nations, for our own interests, we do align in most issues. And the reason is, if you have a government that is just and responsive to its people, most people in the world are more alike than they're not alike. They want to be treated justly. They want a government that responds to them. They want a better life for their children. I can go on at some length on the grand strategic issues. But I would say also that as we look at the more pedestrian, the more near to us current issues that sometimes roil the waters, these are issues that are best addressed by holding on to enduring values. One of those values is this very gathering here where we talk openly among people. We don't play games. We don't play secrets from each other. But also, I think it is by holding on to proven friends in the face of common threats. Threats manifested as recently as last week off the port of Fujairah and Your Royal Highness in the oil fields of Saudi Arabia. We saw these manifest. And these are events that highlight why Iran's behavior must change. This is an area where we are in agreement. So from the grand strategic to the more tactical, immediate issues, we share common ground. Going to the heart of this matter, I think our strategic relationship, ladies and gentlemen, it is very broad, it is very deep, and it is very strong. Broad, deep, and strong. It's broad enough, it is deep enough, and it's strong enough to withstand any temporary challenges of any sort, because the underpinnings are just that strong. The United States right now is disputing internally what's its role in the world. How much do we want to be involved in the world? My advice when I'm asked for it in Washington is we need to engage more in the world. We need to intervene militarily less in the world. There's a way to engage which is positive. And I would say, too, that the U.S.-UAE strategic relationship, the health of it, is in no small part a testimonial to the wise leadership this country has had for enough years that I could sail by in 1979 and see nothing much on the horizon other than some low-hanging houses along the seashore. And then anyone flying into Abu Dhabi airport last night along with me could look out the window and see what your leadership has done. The UAE's leadership has long been seen as strategically and economically savvy. You know this is your reputation in the world. You can read about it in The Economist. You can see it on BBC or CNN. This is not simply your own media telling you something. This is the world view of you and your countrymen, countrywomen. Ambassador Taiba in Washington, D.C. is widely acknowledged as one of the most effective diplomats in the city. He's been a trusted friend, but what he also brings is a view couched in strategic patience. And in an impatient world, that is the sort of leadership that we need if we're going to get through some of the challenges we face right now. Our military-to-military ties, they are extraordinary. They are based very much on mutual respect and a long-standing operational history. In the liberation of Kuwait, we fought alongside each other. We did so again in Somalia. In Bosnia, we protected innocent people, and we worked together there as well. I would say in Afghanistan, the same thing. Whenever the going gets tough, we have found our militaries working alongside each other. Your Air Force and their Block 60 F-16s and your pilots, who are tremendous pilots, they have been tested both in the toughest training we have in America, out in Nevada, and they've been tested in combat, as you know. And between them, your Presidential Guard, your Special Operations Forces, and your patriotic military, your troops know their business. And there's a reason why this respect has grown military to military. Also, the economic ties are very strong. You're our largest trading partner in the Middle East, as you know. But you also go with the international rules of the road. And that is something that innately brings respect from the United States, countries that live by the rules. And those rules help keep the peace and promote prosperity for all. In classical terms, you will find even in American schools and high schools, this country is seen in terms of almost like ancient Greece. It is not unknown to have your country known as ancient Athens for your attention to this education of your young people, both at home and abroad. And certainly in terms of ancient Sparta, in terms of your willingness to stand up and fight for your country. Diplomatically, we have stood together on many issues, and I would just tell you that your diplomats are backed up by that military, so when your diplomats speak, they speak more strongly. And here, Minister Bawardi, who is my colleague for the last 2 years, from Bahrain to Brussels, when he spoke, people listened. They put down what they were doing, and they listened, and they did so because of the strength of your nation's individual reputation. On humanitarian issues, look at that. Right now, your development aid has been a godsend for countries around the world. And how many countries have sent aid to American cities that have been hit by tropical storms? United Arab Emirates has, and that is not forgotten either. So we must ask, what do we do in these times that Dr. Gargash and Secretary Schultz and others describe as fluid or awash in change? I'll speak as an outsider, but an unapologetic friend of United Arab Emirates and of the GCC. I'd say first and foremost, the United Arab Emirates must protect its unique, invaluable reputation. And your example, ladies and gentlemen, has been invaluable in a number of areas. It needs to be protected, that reputation does, even defended, and certainly it needs to be communicated to distinguish how different you are. Your patriotic troops obviously feel a kinship with the people. That's an example for militaries around the world. And those troops, I think because everyone has to serve, your military is a unifying organization. And as such, I would just say that it's a mark of a healthy society, the way you organize your military and your society to work together, not having the military as a tribe apart from the rest of society. I think, too, your reputation for tolerance. Tolerance is a breath of fresh air in a world that seems to be growing increasingly intolerant. And I would just tell you that the Pope's visit, talk is cheap in this world, but the United Arab Emirates speaks through actions that are unmistakable. A third of your cabinet nearly is female, showing you draw the best from across your society. You don't narrow it down to any special group. If you have a lot of people in there who simply have been well educated, they know what they're doing, and they're doing a good job. Hosting the Special Olympics, you are probably not aware of what a message that sent. I was on an airplane coming out of Colorado, and the lady sitting next to me who had been there said she'd got nearly 2 decades of attending Special Olympics. Said the best Special Olympics she'd ever seen, and she characterized your country as compassionate. That was the word that came to her mind talking about United Arab Emirates. Your diplomacy, led by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sheikh Abdullah, I would just tell you that you show the strength of traditional diplomacy, of policies and ambassadors who try to maintain respect for other countries, a very important word, especially it's an example that's needed, I would say right now more than ever when we consider that Iran attempted to murder the ambassador from Saudi Arabia less than 2 miles from the White House. There can be no stronger example that men and women of peace who are ambassadors should be protected than the level of tolerance and the example of diplomacy that comes out of United Arab Emirates. I think, too, that you and I, the UAE and America, we need to hold fast with each other. This is no time to doubt each other, no matter what strains there might be on the relationship. We know we're stronger together. We've proven it in the past. So we need to engage more with each other if doubts arise, not less. And as someone who has been committed to UAE's sovereignty and safety as being key to peace in the region, I yearn for the day when the GCC is once again back together and united, when Egypt and Jordan are standing alongside you, the GCC confronting together Iran's destabilizing activities with a united front. I want to see the day when UAE is not saddled with the problem, the humanitarian situation in Yemen, and I respect and salute what the UAE has done to support the UN Special Envoy in the effort to end that war, that catastrophe. And it's difficult when you're up against people who don't want to end it. But I just ask you to don't stop. Keep working to end it. You've gotten it to the peace table up in Sweden. That's one step at a time, and I know it's maddening for you to be losing your boys in this action. But just keep trying to drive it to the UN negotiations. I remind you that I come here today as a private citizen. And I salute what this country is all about, but please understand that I speak bluntly and I speak favorably for you wherever I go, and I can do so because of your example. But I also speak from both my heart and my head, and I speak the truth as I see it. So I urge you to hold fast to your friends across any temporary disagreements, because we can remain the best of friends if we choose to. Listen to your own thoughts when you embrace others. We trust your judgment about what's in the best interests of UAE, but no nation can lock up 1 million Muslims and then look you in the eye saying they're your brother. No nation can sell you aircraft and say they're your brother and sell the same aircraft to Iran. And no nation knows better than your own leaderships what direction you should take for your foreign policy. I will also assure you that no nation will be more honest with you than America. So to close, America sees enormous value in our strategic relationship with valiant and wisely led United Arab Emirates. We Americans will frustrate you at times because of our form of government with its shared powers in Washington, but because you are a just and responsive government here in UAE, the UAE and America will always find our way back to common ground On that I have no doubt. So I hope that I have increased understanding between us here tonight. I don't come here to lecture. I look forward to the questions. But here in the midst of Holy Ramadan, I would just say, Shukran, Your Highness, Excellencies, and all my friends here tonight, thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, Yusuf.
Yes, sir. Thank you, General. General, you mentioned the recent attacks off the coast of Fujairah, and as you noticed, the increased tensions in the region with respect to Iran in general. If you were in your old job today, what would you be advising the President about how to deal with the environment that we're in?
Yeah, I think the first point when it comes to Iran, as it is with most intractable problems, unilateralism will not work. The more we can come together and define the conditions of behavior that say this is what we stand for, this is what we'll tolerate, and this is what we will not tolerate. The more nations that come together that use diplomacy and use economics, it will be compelling. Do we have to have military forces doing joint patrols right now? Unfortunately, yes, we do. And we all know why about what happened in the Saudi oil fields and Al Fujairah port. But at the same time, the purpose of the military at a time like this, in my mind, is to buy time, to keep things stable, do not let them get out of hand, and get the diplomats in a position to work their magic, to work their diplomacy. It's how we, frankly, how do you keep the peace one more year, one more month, one more week, one more day, one more hour, and keep the diplomats in a position of strength. Do not allow them to be dismissed. And that is best done through unity. So I would encourage alliance unity, that alliance be in all nations that do not want to see what Iran has been doing, from the assassination of a former prime minister in Beirut to the attacks on Saudi towns along the border of Yemen to the attempt to murder Ambassador Jaber in Washington, D.C. We need to contain this kind of behavior until the Iranian people, our problem's not the Iranian people, until the Iranian people can do what they have to do in Tehran.
Sir, you've been able to work with virtually every country in this part of the world. Mm-hmm. And as you know, most countries take the twin threats of Iran and extremism very seriously. Mm-hmm. As an American who spent most of his career dealing with those two threats, what do you expect from your partners in the region? How would you like them to cooperate with you to deal with those two issues?
Yeah, as we just discussed, Ambassador, about being together, the first thing we're taught as young officers in the U.S. Marines is how our Revolutionary War general, trained his officers to do their job, because we had to work with allies. We were not good enough to beat the Redcoats, the British, but we had to work with others. And he said the way you work with others is first you listen, then you learn, then you help, and then you lead. What I would like is when we get into these situations that the lines of communication between Abu Dhabi and Washington, between Riyadh and Washington, Bahrain, Amman, I can go on. We want all those lines of communication open. We will come up with better solutions if we first listen to each other, learn from each other, and then help each other to put together the coalition. I would approach it in that manner. I think, too, we have got to be able to communicate with each other. We all know the ballistic missile threat is real. Are we sharing all the radar data so that we can see, using the geometry of physics, we can see the threat if it gets launched against one of our nations, one of our friends out here? Because if that happens, we're going to have only minutes to make decisions and protect the people who are going to be under fire. So it goes from the strategic, let's work together, listen to each other, come up with good ideas, down to the tactical, how do we actually protect people in the event Iran does what they've done, unfortunately, in the past, which is attack innocent people.
Sir, let's take it over to the U.S. side. Mm-hmm. There's a current debate taking place in the United States, and the debate has become oversimplified to these two options: engagement or disengagement. and we tend to watch this flip-flop back and forth. Help us understand how this debate in the U.S. is unfolding, and help us understand where you think this debate needs to end, and how can we play a part in engaging in this debate?
This is a great question and very appropriate to our time. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember that when we broke with King George, we specifically did not want to play a global role. We saw ourselves basically as an agrarian farming nation. During the years of World War II, thanks to geography and due to the aftermath, we found ourselves in a position to confront a global menace. We saw Soviet communism as something, as forcing a godless way of life and stripping all economic incentive from every nation and making every nation the exact same. And we were going to organize against it. Having seen World War II, we wanted to make certain there was a way for desperate people to have some place to turn rather than turning to a Mussolini or a Hitler. So we created the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund as a lender of last resort so people who lost hope economically would not go there. We created NATO. As the Australian ambassador to Washington told me, you made the single most self-sacrificial pledge in history when you pledged 100 million dead Americans in a nuclear war to protect Western Europe's democracies from the Soviet army. He said, you put together really the United Nations as a place where people could talk things over. It was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be a place we could talk about problems. And he went on as he explained to me what we had done. What we need to do is update all those organizations, and those updates need to come from nations that have been wisely led, are economically savvy, and can work with tolerance for other people's differences. And yes, I'm talking about, in this case, as your guest, I'm talking about United Arab Emirates, a place where everyone has a role to play in the government and in the country's future, everyone. And as we put this together, we need the Americans to be reassured we're not going to ask you to carry the full burden. For example, in NATO, where we spend 2 to 3 times as much as some of our NATO allies, not all of them, some of them do well, but there's no reason for us to be doing so much more for them when they're no longer devastated from World War II. So we're going to have to sort out this new world that is very fluid, as Dr. Gargash put it. I think it's a very accurate word. So we need to adapt those integration mechanisms so that we continue to engage, but we do not walk away from the world. Remember, the reason our greatest generation after World War II said it might be a crummy world, but we've got to engage in it, was because we had walked away after World War I. We said, we're done with this. We don't want no more of your European wars. We're coming home. We refused to join the League of Nations, and Ethiopia got invaded by the fascists as a result. We have to remember our history so we don't simply repeat it. I hope that helps.
Sir, you're going to be going back to work in a couple of weeks.
I will.
What do you think will occupy your mind, and how would you think about what you perceive as the biggest threat the world faces? Not just the United States, but the world.
Whoa. You know, there's 2, I think, big issues. One of them is domestic for me, and that is, how does America come back to a fundamental friendliness with each other inside their own country? There's just too much anger, too much intolerance. But worldwide, I think we're going to have to figure out, how do nations work together with respect for each other's differences, but corral this terrorism that is growing. It is not going away. It's actually going the other direction as we see it spread into North Africa, as we see what's going on now as it spreads deeper into South Asia. We're going to have to figure out, how do we do this? We don't have to be perfect nations, each one of us. We're going to have to protect what we have as we all work on our own nations to make them better. But I'm going to spend a lot of time studying how do we get more nations to work together and see a way towards a world with less of this terrorism. If this terrorism continues, eventually there will be a time when the terrorists get their hands on weapons of mass destruction. And that is something that people with my color hair in this room have got to make certain we do not pass to the next generation. We must not let that happen. So we're going to have to find a way to get rid of the root causes of terrorism. One thing that's very clear, I was just reading in the newspaper this morning, Dubai has the lowest unemployment rate in the world right now. People who have hope, people who have a job, who see a useful way of getting up in the morning, taking care of their family, are less likely to go towards radicalism. So economics are going to be critical. We need you to continue what you're doing to help Africa stand on its feet. And I know very well how much Africa depends on you for advice and for development aid. You're going to have to continue this because the French army and the black troops there in North Africa can only buy time against Boko Haram. They cannot solve that problem. That's going to be solved by economics, education, and all the things that you pride United Arab Emirates for that you do here. We're going to have to do that, and I'm going to spend a lot of time on this with allied nations.
Sir, this room has a lot of decision makers in Abu Dhabi and in the UAE. If you were advising them on the UAE's position in the world today, in summary, based on everything you've said earlier, what would your final words of advice be to this room?
Well, I've always been reluctant to give advice. And the reason is not false modesty. I just think you need to really understand a culture. I have trouble understanding all of American political culture, and I'm an American. So I know I don't understand anywhere near what I would want to confidently give advice, but I can tell you this. The raw example of UAE, since you found your way out from under colonialism, that example is precious to the world today. While many of you young people do not realize how lucky they are because they've grown up with this freedom, you should never lose sight of the fact that you could lose it. And if the world around you becomes bad enough, pretty soon you can give up some of your freedom to walk on an airplane without walking through a metal detector first. You know what I mean? You have to adapt to the world around you. Somehow you need to really fight to always keep UAE improving and consistent with those founding principles that have served you so well today. I mean, you fly in on Etihad Airlines, and it's the year of tolerance here. How many countries in the world right now are having the year of tolerance this year? I don't know of any others. Your example is very important, so hold fast. Hold fast to your traditions, hold fast to your values, hold fast to your friends, and if your friends are going the wrong direction, talk to them more. But hold fast to who you are and your uniqueness. That uniqueness is very, very important in a world that seems to be verging the other direction on tolerance, on economic responsibility by leaders. I can go on.
Thank you, sir. There's no doubt that the UAE and the United States are bound by common interests and common values. The UAE, participating in 6 coalitions with the United States over the last 25 years, prove that we also have common threats. And we've managed to build a very strategic relationship with the United States at all levels. But that strategic and institutional relationship is always built on strong personal relationships. And General Mattis has not only been a key partner that enabled this relationship to grow, but he has also been a very good friend to the UAE and to me personally. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've all just witnessed why Jim Mattis is held in such high regard around the world. His honesty, his candor, and his integrity are unassailable. He cares about his country, and he cares about his partners just as much as he cares about his soldiers and his troops. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking General Mattis for his service and his friendship.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yusuf.